Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. Knight's Path is an upcoming open world action RPG. There is a demo on Steam called Knight's Path The Tournament, which I just completed. This demo is showcasing the combat of the game, but also a couple of quests and some game mechanics that we could expect to see when the full game releases.
I think I forgot to take my pants off.
Knight's Path is heavily inspired by Gothic 2 and Sekiro, which might sound weird at first, but it makes a lot more sense when you start playing the demo. I can tell you right now that this is one of the best demos for a game that I ever played. The combat is always a major concern when it comes to open world RPGs. So it's always a good sign when the actual demo has fully developed combat mechanics which work properly. More importantly, the combat is very fun, and I couldn't put the controller down. You get to fight a lot of different soldiers in the tournament in 3 rounds. My soldiers, I gather you here today to tell you about a revolutionary way to browse the internet and go back to medieval times, while pretending that this helmet is from that time period. Opera GX gives you the full control over your PC while browsing. By limiting the amount of RAM and CPU usage, you can completely get rid of any lag in your game while having a bunch of tabs opened, listening to music, or whatever you do in your browser, I don't wanna know. This simple panel allows you to directly control the resources that your browser uses. Compared to something like Google Chrome, Opera GX uses a lot less resources by default, as you can see here. The new feature called GX Mods just dropped, and I absolutely love it because it allows me to customize the whole browsing experience with just a couple of clicks. These involve background music, keyboard sounds, opening and closing tab sounds, theme and colors of the browser, and dedicated wallpapers. You can seamlessly switch any of these options on or off with a simple click in the GX mod menu. You already know what I'm going to use. Yeah, you heard that right, I'm using Gothic 2 mod as well as Dark Souls mod, because it has a very cool animated background. But those are only a couple of examples. You can find a lot more mods in the GX store for free. And if you're afraid to switch browsers because of passwords, cookies and bookmarks, well, you don't have to worry. Opera GX has a quick import tool that allows you to quickly import all of your settings from your previous browser. Many thanks to Opera GX for sponsoring this video and giving me the excuse to finally wear this helmet. Use the link in the description to download Opera GX today. Even though Gothic games were amazing, the combat in those games was never the main selling point. Character progression on the other hand was stellar, and Knight's Path recognizes that, so it tries to mimic the same design philosophy. When you start the game, your character is not experienced with sword fighting. There is a trainer that will teach you new combat moves each time you progress to the next tournament rounds.
First things first, let's adjust your stance.
If you played old Gothic games, you probably know that this is how the combat progression worked. You would get different animations for attacks each time you progress, which made sense and it felt really good. Knight's Path will apparently have the same idea for its progression, but in this vertical slice it's obvious they had to speed up the process in order to show us what we can expect. There are no levels, skill trees or anything like that in the demo, although technically you get experience when you progress through the rounds. You can only buy new weapons or armor when you get enough gold from beating the opponents, which you'll probably need, unless you want to make things even harder for yourself. Speaking of making things harder for myself, before I started fighting the strongest opponent in the arena, I selected the hardcore mode. I had no clue this will actually make him much harder to fight because I'm stupid and I can't read. But I'm glad I did, because this fight will show you the actual potential of the combat system in the full game. Now let's go back to the beginning of the demo, before we start talking about the infamous Wandering Knight. When you start the demo, you first need to get a proper weapon in order to join the tournament. You need to do a simple quest before you can get a weapon, but the game doesn't tell you exactly what you need to do. NPCs can give you some hints, and if you explore this small camp, you can overhear the conversation from 2 guards. Apparently, one of the guards is very scared of rats, even though he's a freaking guard. Look, it's an RPG, of course you're going to kill some rats. Actually, it was only 1 rat, even though the guard told you there are more because he's very ashamed of this situation.
Have you rid us of those foul rats?
There was only one rat, and yes, I killed it.
As you could probably tell, the voice acting is not all that great, but I honestly won't care as long as the majority of NPCs are voice acted. And I think this aspect of the game could probably improve if this small studio gets the funding they need. Anyway, this guy will lend you his sword so you can enter the tournament, and as soon as you get enough gold to buy your own weapon, you can complete this quest by returning the sword. You can also do some very limited exploration, but there are a couple of interesting things to find. For example, if you find the key for the storage, you can loot the game map. Yet another feature from Gothic games where you had to buy or find the map first in order to actually see the world map. Speaking of which, I like how the developer is teasing the open world from this part of the arena. It makes you wonder how cool it would be to explore this open world in the final game. And after completing the demo, I just wanted to play more. That's always a good sign if you ask me. The open world is described as small but dense, which is exactly what you would expect in a game that's inspired by Gothic 2. Back to the matter at hand, you can enter the tournament when you get the weapon. You have to talk with the NPC you wish to fight and walk to the arena. The arena guy always has a nice little announcement and off you go. Your opponents in the first round are not very hard, but the challenge is still there. You have a simple attack combo, a block, a parry, which is the same as block but you need better timing, and you also get a dodge. This is what you start with, but it's enough for defeating the opponents from the first round. First of all, the controls are pretty snappy and responsive in general. If you don't like using the parry, you probably won't like this combat very much, but I would still highly recommend trying it out. The animations are pretty solid and easy to predict when you need to block or parry. Speaking of block, the reason why you don't want to block all the time is the stun meter. Both you and the enemy have a stun meter, and when it fills up, the character is stunned. This is pretty much a death sentence against stronger enemies in the arena, but it goes both ways. I was genuinely impressed with the combat AI and the amount of different attack patterns for the enemies. You really need to pay attention to their attack patterns and use everything that you learn from the trainer. When you lose in a fight, it almost always feels fair because your timing was probably off or you didn't use the correct ability. For example, in round 2 and 3, enemies get this powerful thrust attack that you have to parry by dodging forward and countering the attack. But it's not only that, the enemy AI can be very unpredictable while not feeling cheap. The powerful attack has a special sound and visual effect that you can't miss, and you have around 1.5 seconds to react properly. Most attacks feel very impactful, and the beefy sound effects help a lot.
I yield.
Although the thrusting and the regular attacks could feel a bit better, they certainly lack the impact compared to other hits. Blocking feels amazing, the strong attack is awesome when it connects, and the counter attack is pretty good. As you progress through the rounds, enemies get a couple of more strong attacks that you need to dodge in different directions. You really need to pay attention to their animations because even if your timing is right for the dodge, you'll still get hit if you don't dodge in the right direction. I think they managed to nail the feeling of the difficulty in this demo. The iframes on the dodge are very precise, which is important to get right in this type of combat. Like I said, your parry is pretty much the most important ability in combat, hence the comparisons with Sekiro. However, it's obvious that only way stronger enemies will require you to be a lot more precise than usual with the parry. Which brings us to this motherfucker. This freaking guy kicked my ass for about 1.5 hours. You know how it feels when you get stuck on a particular boss in a Souls-like game? Well, that's exactly what I felt when I was fighting this guy. Like I said before, I selected the hardcore difficulty before we started the fight, so it was probably way harder than the normal version. Everything you learned so far about the combat has to be utilized in almost a perfect manner in order to beat this dude. Even though he gave me so much trouble, I freaking love this fight and it makes me very excited about the full game. His AI can be relentless, and he has an impressive amount of moves that he can combine. It's up to you to read them properly and react. However, this fight also highlights some of the small issues I had with the combat. For example, I wish that some combat rules were a bit more consistent. I noticed that you can interrupt powerful attacks with a simple stab. So naturally, you might think this will always work, but sometimes it doesn't for no apparent reason. I think this should be consistent as long as your attack connects. This was the reason why I died a bunch of times, because I assumed the stab will interrupt the powerful attack. Besides that, this fight is freaking amazing and brutal.
I yield.
The dialogue is very decent, although you might get the idea that it's way worse because of the voice acting.
Good folk, attention. A duel to whet our appetites begins. Here comes Everard, a sturdy guard from the north, representing Austrasplit.
Hey look, you can pet the kitty.
Good kitty.
There was a scene where she started eating the rat that I killed in the beginning, but unfortunately I lost that footage. It was hilarious because the rat is way bigger than the cat. Ulrich also had a dialogue line about this scene, which is a very nice attention to detail. This might seem like a small thing, but it's very important for building the immersive game world.
Fuck off!
Even though this demo was heavily focused on combat, you can see the potential in the design philosophy for other features in the game. The demo has very positive reviews on Steam, so if you don't believe me, well, people have spoken. I think these guys are searching for a publisher which will help with bringing the full game to life. And I really hope they find one because, like I said, this is one of the best demos for a game that I played in a long time.
Thank you for everything. It was an honor.
The demo is free on Steam, so you should definitely check it out. And that will be it for this video. Did you play Knight's Path, the tournament, and what did you think about it? Leave a comment down below. If you like this video, feel free to check out my other content on the channel. I focus on RPGs, and I have a couple of different running series on the channel that you might find interesting. You can also check out some of my t-shirts and hoodies on the official store. I have many different designs in the theme of the channel. Many thanks to all of my channel members and Patreons, and I'll see you in the next one.